Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name's Carter. I love talking about movies, horror movies, superheroes, and comic books. It's quite the quartet, I know. But tonight, I just got out of seeing the new Radio Silence vampire movie, Abigail. For some background context, I really love Radio Silence's movies, especially Scream 5 and Ready or Not. They've always been very fun, and I think they strike a really great balance between horror and comedy. And I really didn't know that much about Abigail going into it. All I knew is that it's a ballerina vampire, I knew the cast, and I knew that it's pretty much a bottle movie to where the whole film takes place, or almost the whole film, takes place in one location, or just a few locations, and I love those type of movies. My favorite one of late was Your Lucky Day from just a few months ago, also with Angus Cloud, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. So going into this movie, I really didn't know that much about it, and I think that definitely helped my experience. So my recommendation is to not watch any trailers, like go in blind, or watch this review after you've seen the movie, because I had a ton of fun watching everything unfold. Getting right into the positives of Abigail, it's very entertaining. This movie knows what it is, and it shoots right for that center of the target of being entertaining, and it definitely hits it. It is very much a horror comedy, much in line with the tone and vibe of all of Radio Silence's films. And so you've seen a Radio Silence film, you know what you're getting into. Gory, graphic, horror action with a lot of fun one-liners and some tense sequences. And so I really enjoyed the atmosphere of this movie, the look, the feel of this movie. Blood splashes on the camera. It's very grungy, very grimy. It's definitely like Resident Evil 1. Like the mansion is just straight up Resident Evil 1. And I loved that. Like, please make Resident Evil. Make the first Resident Evil. So honestly, the biggest positive, like I mentioned, it's entertaining. It's fun. It makes you laugh. It's got a lot of great action and violence. The kills are very gory and graphic. There's a lot of great, like, gore-filled moments, and I really liked those. It was a lot more graphic than I was expecting, which was awesome, because I think when films can do a fun version of, like, graphic violence, which sounds like it doesn't belong in the same sentence, I think when those can be done well, they are so fun. I know it sounds weird, but when you see the movie, you'll understand, like, it's gross, but it's also very entertaining in a great way. And what makes it even better is that the characters are enjoyable to watch. So if they bite the dust, when they bite the dust, it's actually like, oh man, that sucks, but that kill is really awesome. I really enjoyed Dan Stevens and Kevin Durand in this film, especially. Everyone does a pretty good job. Kathryn Newton is just, like, so off kilter and, like, in over her head, and Melissa Barrera handles the dramatic moments of the film really well. She's a pretty good final girl. After seeing the Scream movies, I can definitely buy her as someone who can hold her own in a horror movie, and she gets thrown around in this. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, you have a shattered rib cage right now. Dan Stevens is just so, like, delightfully despicable in this film. He is so over the top, but he's so much fun to watch, and you can tell Dan Stevens is just having such a great time. Kevin Durand consistently got the biggest laughs out of my theater. He plays Peter, who is, like, the big, dumb, muscly dude, and he was just a ton of fun to watch in the film, to where he's so over the top, but he also has these little moments, little lines that just make you laugh, and he's, like, so genuine. I don't want to do this, but this is my job. I'm trying to do my job. And he's, like, very protective of a character. And that came off as, like, very genuine. Surprisingly, I thought that actually was kind of like a not touching, but it was a very genuine relationship. Very easy for me to buy into just because of the performances from Kevin Durand and Kathryn Newton. Kevin Durand is, like, he's, like, shielding her like a big brother, like a father, and I actually really liked that. That's such a small thing that I'll just throw out there, and I really enjoyed maybe small moments like that. I also think the script, done by Stephen Shields and Guy Busick, like I mentioned before, I love bottle films that take place in one location, and this actually has some great reasons to take place in one location, and while I do think that maybe it takes a minute to get going, I'll talk about that more in my mix. Once it gets going, it's, like, balls to the wall, breakneck, everything's really fun, and it's a really fun time at the movies. It also goes in a lot of places that I didn't really expect it to go. Like I mentioned before, I tried to stay away from the trailers, and so going into the third act, there was a ton of surprises for me that actually, like, came off very fun and genuine, and I loved how the movie progressed and what it led to in the ending. I think that it ended on a strong note, and as far as story beats go, I really don't have any issues. My issues kind of come down to like character choices, which I'll get into the negative. Ballerina aspect of it is very fun. I wish it played into more of the kills, but I think it's very prominent in a lot of the music, a lot of the dancing, and like the way she chases her victims. She dances around and does like cartwheels, and so I found it to be very entertaining, just very creative and unique. There's no ballerina vampire films, so at least not that I know of. This one is pretty effective at it. The cinematography done by Aaron Morton is also very strong as well. Like I mentioned, the aesthetic and the vibe of the film is very well done. People just get drenched in blood and you see all of it. You see it drip down their face, you see it puddle up, and Aaron Morton even does this thing where it gets on the camera at some points, and I thought that was very unique, very creative. I love when blood splashes on the camera because I'm like, oh, it's so good, like just kind of breaking the fourth wall, but also it's just freaking really cool to look at, and I love it. I can't take my eyes off it, man. When the blood splashes on the camera, I'm locked in. There's great moments when maybe Abigail's moving and you hear her bones crack or something, and there's a lot of operatic songs in the score, and the effects are good. There's a CGI effect that's reused a few times that I think looked really good, and when it switches to practical, I found it to be pretty seamless. The vampire teeth look great. The way that Abigail moves is awesome. As far as technicality goes, this movie's really well made, and you can tell it was made with a lot of care, a lot of love behind the camera. However, I do have a few mixed to negative things. Some of them may be nitpicks. Feel free to disagree with me down in the comments below, and let me know what you thought of Abigail. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you agree with my points? I'd love to hear differing opinions on this. Going into my mixed, I'd say the pacing and the editing definitely could have used a little bit of work. It does take quite a bit to get started. It takes its time, like setting everything up, but I think there was maybe a few too many like lingering scenes to where you could have just chopped a little bit of it up, made it kind of flow a little quicker in the beginning, because it honestly does take quite a while to get started. And another thing that confused me is that it treats some moments like big reveals. For example, this is not a spoiler in the slightest because everyone knows it. It treats the reveal that Abigail is a vampire like it's some massive plot twist. That part was kind of confusing to me because it's marketed as the little girl is the vampire, the ballerina girl is the vampire. Posters, trailers, like radio silence themselves. And it just kind of came off as strange. I think that happens quite a few times in the movie where it's pretty predictable. I had most of it figured out early on. Honestly, I was like, oh yeah, that's gonna happen, this is gonna happen, and that's gonna happen. There's a few aspects of it that surprised me, and that movie telegraphs where it's going pretty early on, at least with a lot of the characters, and so I could kind of catch onto it. And while that didn't make the experience bad for me, I do wish that at some points it maybe tried a little harder to just veer into more unknown territory, because I think when this movie is at its best is when it's just doing its own thing, when it's doing things I didn't expect it to do, especially in the third act. There are a few things I wish they maybe touched on a little more, or reveals that felt a little like, oh yeah, that's obvious, or maybe a little like short-sighted, just like I kind of know why it's in there, but also a little disappointing. My biggest mixed aspects of this film would definitely be like the editing, pacing. I loved some of the writing. It was very funny. Most of the humor hit for me, and so I put that in the positive. And while I think that technically this movie was very, very well made, I do think there were some things that were just weird, like that marketing thing. Like, yeah, we know Abigail's a vampire. It's really obvious. I know some people might not agree with that, but that's just how I personally felt. Like, I was just like, oh, like, it kind of just creates some false senses of suspense to where it's like, if you didn't know she was a vampire, you take someone that has no idea, who's avoided the marketing, avoided the posters, and they see this movie, they don't know anything about it, they'll be like, whoa, that's crazy, like, I actually didn't know that. But for 90% of the people who go see this, it's just like, oh, yeah, well, duh. And finally, getting into my negatives, I don't have a ton for this one. I mostly just have one big thing. So while I've praised the writing throughout the film, and I do think it goes in some fun places, maybe I should have put the script and writing in the medium. As far as dialogue goes, it's great. The dialogue is hilarious. The banter back and forth is great. There's a lot of great quotable lines in the film. Dan Stevens is amazing. Melissa Barrera is fantastic. There are a few character choices to where I'm like, that is so dumb. And I know, it's a nitpick because horror movies, for people that don't watch horror movies and even for some horror buffs, a big thing is like, oh, why did they split up? Why did the characters do this? Well, if they did that, there wouldn't be a movie. Like, if they didn't split up, you wouldn't get slashers slashing. And if they didn't go into that one area, you wouldn't get the movie. Like, if they stopped at the front of Camp Crystal Lake, said, this feels weird, and turned around, you wouldn't get a Friday the 13th movie. And while some people can just write this off as like, yeah, it's a horror movie, of course they're going to do that, I had a harder time doing that, to where sometimes I was genuinely left like baffled. Like, what are they doing? Like, why are they doing that? That makes no sense at all. Why are they doing that? Like, why are they splitting up? It happens in every single horror movie. Why are they splitting up? Obviously, people would not split up, especially if they know that there's a vampire in the house with them. There'd probably be strength in numbers. And yeah, you won't clear as much ground, but at least you might stand a chance. And there's a moment in the film where, I really don't want to spoil it, but they find out some things are ineffective against Abigail, and they all split up on their own. And only one person has the ability to defend themselves against Abigail. And that part really annoyed me, if I'm being honest. I was like, this is really dumb. Like, it's obviously just for one sequence in the film, and I was like, okay, this is so stupid. And there's parts in the film where they have things to use against Abigail, maybe to stall her, stop her, harm her, anything like that, and they just don't do it. Instead, they're like, run, we have to run, when it's like, you could do that, you know that, right? Like, I thought that's what they were going to do. It seemed so obvious. And I don't know, dude. So sometimes some things like that just felt a little weird to me. But overall, I really did enjoy Abigail. Even though I do think some of the character choices were so dumb. It was pretty predictable, and I'm kind of confused about some of the marketing and some of like the pacing of the film. I really did enjoy this movie. The last 2/3 definitely felt like a Carter movie. I was like, yes, this is something I love to watch. I love over-the-top slashers that have so much action, so much blood, and it's just going for it, but also has a really fun vibe. And so when movies come around like this, I just love them. I have such a good time with them. So Abigail definitely felt like it was meant for me. I loved a lot of the vampire action. I loved where the story went with some characters in the end. And I really enjoyed some of the stuff they added or changed, like vampire mythos. It's really fun to watch vampire movies and see what all the creators do with the rules. So I always have a good time with that. I think this one has some fun stuff to do with the rules. So I would definitely recommend checking Abigail out. As far as a score goes, I'm going to give this one like an 8 out of 10. I had a fun time with it. There's been some bangers this year, if I'm being honest. It's been a fun year for movies, and I've been rewatching some old stuff, discovering new stuff. And also, as always, if you have anything you'd like me to watch or check out, review, let me know down in the comments below. I will also be releasing my Invincible Season 2 review coming soon, along with my horror video that I've been working on. It's going to be pretty long, pretty extensive, so when you see it, you'll understand why it's taking me forever, but I do apologize for that. So, as always, guys, my name is Carter, and you have a great rest of your day.